Bruce Hillman. I'm pastor at Hillside Lutheran Brethren Church in northern New Jersey, and today is Thursday, and we're going to be in chapter 10 of Ecclesiastes. I'm sorry for missing our devotion last week. I literally had another appointment at our normal devotion time and was not able to make it. But we are quickly coming to the close of the book, and so today we're going to get through 10, and then we just have 11 and 12. And some of you have been kind enough to post some potential books, Bible books or devotional topics that you'd like to see, and this would be the last week. If you're interested in doing that, you can put that down, and I will certainly consider it for either the next devotions that we do or the ones following. Anyway, let's read the text today. A bit of a mismatch. It's just a bunch of different proverbs that don't seem to have a lot of connections to them before he gets to the kind of last big parts at the end that tie in the rest of the book. But let's read it. This is what it says. Dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. A wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. Even when the fool walks on the road, he lacks sense, and he says to everyone that he is a fool. If the anger of the ruler rises against you, do not leave your place, for calmness will lay great offense to rest. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, as it were an error proceeding from the ruler. Folly is set in many high places, and the rich sit in a low place. I have seen slaves on horses, and princes walking on the ground like slaves. He who digs a pit will fall into it, and a serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. He who quarries stone is hurt by them, and he who splits logs is endangered by them. If the iron is blunt, and the one does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength, but wisdom helps one to succeed. If the serpent bites before it is charmed, there is no advantage to the charmer. The words of a wise man's mouth win him favor, but the lips of a fool consume him. The beginning of words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is evil madness. A fool multiplies words, though no man knows what is to be, and who can tell him what will be after him? The toil of a fool wearies him, for he does not know the way of the city. Woe to you, O land, when your king is a child, and your princes feast in the morning. Happy are you, O land, when your king is the son of the nobility, and your princes feast at the proper time, for strength and not for drunkenness. Through sloth the roof sinks in, and through indolence the house leaks. Bread is made for laughter, and wine gladdens life, and money answers everything. Even in your thoughts do not curse the king, nor in your bedroom curse the rich, for a bird of the air will carry your voice, or some winged creature may tell the matter. End of reading. So chapter 10 seems to be a collection of wise sayings, very similar to what the book of Proverbs is about. It's just a collection of different quotes and sayings of the wise that one should study so that one can also become wise. Why chapter 10 falls in between 9 and 11, the content of 9 and 11, we're not entirely sure. It seems as if Koheleth, the writer of the book, just kind of goes off and adds this collection of wise sayings. But what he's probably trying to do is one last time stress to us the value of wisdom so that he can make his final point, which really is one point that consumes 11 and 12, but it's divided into two chapters. So, instead of reading each and every one of these proverbs and trying to make sense of them, which would take more time, let me just kind of talk in general about what he's trying to accomplish today. Basically what he's saying is fools are everywhere. They're in positions of power. They're, in our modern day, they would be sometimes our politicians, leaders of industry, people who are in places of influence. There are also, fools can be found in the lower areas of society. Fools are everywhere. That's kind of what he's saying. So we have to be careful to think that there's a class of fools. No, fools can be found everywhere. But they have certain characteristics that make them foolish, that we can see and that we should therefore avoid. Now in this chapter he gives two criteria on how you can tell who is a fool. And he's tapping into the proverbial tradition here. One of them is sloth. A fool tends to be someone who wants a lot but isn't willing to necessarily work hard to get it. In the book of Proverbs, they even say a fool is so lazy that he doesn't even want to bring the spoon or the fork to his mouth. So you get this idea that a fool is someone who has high views of themselves and who has a lot of entitlement issues but doesn't actually want to work for it. That's a fool. But more so in this chapter, there's another characteristic of a fool. And it's an important thing to think about. A fool is someone who is full of words. That is to say, they're someone who speaks a lot, but the content of their speech does not match their behavior and their lifestyle. And this is really, I think, where he's getting at with the different talk of fools this morning. In the proverbial tradition, a fool is someone who speaks a lot but doesn't back it up with action. Here's the distinction that's important to make. A fool is not someone who's stupid. When we hear the word fool, we just think synonymously, oh, this person is a stupid person. But that's not actually what the proverbial fool is. The proverbial fool is someone who actually is probably incredibly intelligent. They're someone who is very good at convincing you to do things. They're someone who is very good at winning debates. You're not probably going to win against them. They're highly intelligent people. They're highly good debaters. They're good at convincing you of their way. But what makes them a fool is they're all talk. And their actions don't follow. So we have to think about, in this final section, this final chapter, what is the advantages of being wise? Why would it be better to be wise than to be the fool? The fool can get ahead. We've seen this throughout the whole book. A fool is someone who seems smart, they're charming, but their actions don't back it up. So that should infer to us, well, okay, what does this mean about then being a wise person? For Koheleth, a wise person, or to have wisdom, is to have a certain type of lifestyle. You could put it this way: wisdom is knowing and doing right. If you just have the knowledge but you don't do it, you're lazy or foolish, right? Or if you just do things and you don't know why, you're foolish. So wisdom combines two aspects. It is knowing and doing what is right. And that's why we read books like Ecclesiastes and Proverbs and Song of Solomon. These books are instructions in how to live. But here's the big point that we can't forget in the whole point of Ecclesiastes, but we don't try to become wise to get ahead. The point of getting wisdom is not to have an advantage over other people so that you could be more successful. This is what Koheleth is at pains to try to deconstruct for us. We think that the advantage of wisdom is gain, but the advantage of wisdom is not gain. Koheleth says this over and over again. So then, the question now posed towards the end of the book is, then what is the advantage of wisdom if it's not going to get you ahead? If fools are sometimes in high positions of power and wise men save cities from our last devotional and then are forgotten, what is the advantage of wisdom? Well, the advantage of wisdom is that wisdom gives you a way of living. It's a whole philosophy, really. It's a whole way of seeing how you, as an individual person, operate within the world. And it benefits others. And by benefiting others, it so much benefits you. So let's talk about wisdom as we kind of close the devotional here in a more New Testament way. In the New Testament, we learn that wisdom is not just knowledge, but that wisdom is essentially Jesus Christ himself. So this is interesting. In the New Testament, wisdom, which has this long tradition that we've been reading in the Old Testament, all of a sudden has this weird paradox that happens to it. And we're told that wisdom is Jesus himself. So, for example, in 1 Corinthians, we are told Christ, the power of God, and the wisdom of God. And we find out that Jesus is the wisdom of God, and that he was in the beginning, and when the world was created, wisdom was there, and Christ was there. So what does it mean for Christ to be the wisdom of God? And then, once we figure that out, how does that apply to us? That's how I want to close the devotional today. Christ, the wisdom of God, Paul says, is to understand, rather, that Christ is the wisdom of God, is to understand that Christ is the power of God. And to understand what it means he's the power of God is that Christ's wisdom is that he is the Savior who went to the cross. This is God's wisdom displayed. God doing what is right, knowing and doing what is right. The wisdom of God was to crucify the Son. And this is not seen as wise by the world. And so what Paul is trying to show us is that biblical wisdom, knowing and doing right, it's not rational. It's not something that we just figure out, which is why we should read wisdom books. It's something that is revealed to us because the wisdom of God is in fact paradoxical. It is not like us. Life is found in a cross. And you see this in Jesus' statements all the time, right? Whoever is last will be first. He must give up his life to find his life. The weak will be strong, Paul says. You have all these paradoxical, wise sayings in the New Testament that are trying to show that God operates differently. And that God's wisdom is not just a gnosis, a knowledge. God is not interested in you and I predominantly just knowing the right things about him. It is important to know the right things about doctrine and God. But essentially what God wants us to do is taste and see that the Lord is good. Right? Taste and see that he's good. How do you taste and see that he's good? Well, you see that he's good most essentially in the cross. So, wisdom is something, we might put it this way, that goes beyond simply reason or the empirical. And biblical wisdom is something that God gives to us. So why does he give it to us? Why does God give us wisdom? Why is wisdom better than folly? If wisdom's not going to get us ahead, what's the point? Because wisdom gets us God. Wisdom gets us God, and then by default it helps us love and serve our neighbor. And as Christians, this should be an incredibly important thing for us. Wisdom is a faithful way of seeing the world. You can think about it that way. It's how the eyes of faith operate. So for example, it might be the case that in my life I'm going through a particular type of hardship and I'm really struggling with something. And the people around me, maybe like Job's friends, are giving me all sorts of good rational advice. Don't worry, I'm sure everything will just work out, it'll all be fine, whatever else. But I know it's not going to be fine. I know that maybe I might get a bad diagnosis at the doctor and I'm waiting for the test results. Or I know that I may not get the promotion, or I may not pass the test, or my marriage may not work out, or things like this, right? You know what it's like to be in those types of situations. And what wisdom does is wisdom is this type of defiance that says, despite my experience and despite my reason, I am going to hold on to what is true. And this is part of what's building our house upon a rock. Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. He is the wisdom of God. So to build our lives on Christ is to build our hope onto something beyond our experience and beyond our reason. And that is something that Koheleth has been trying to teach us this whole time. Enjoy what life gives you when it gives you. See it as a gift from God. It truly is a gift from God. And when the hard times come, and when the scary things happen, or could happen, wisdom gives us these eyes of faith. And wisdom says, well, wait a minute. What does God say about this situation that I'm dealing with? How does God speak to me in the midst of my desert or dark valley, or in the midst of my fears, or in the midst of my pain? And oftentimes what God does not do is just give me platitudes, which is what the world gives me. The world gives me little fortune cookies to make me feel better. And I get so frustrated when I look on Facebook and I look at the New York Times bestseller list, and it's all these gurus and all these people who are basically selling, pilfering inspiration. That's what they're doing. Just kind of optimism that they're throwing out there, which is fine, except that the optimism doesn't really reach into the heart of a deeply painful human experience. And when we have a deeply painful human experience, what we need is not platitudes. We need someone to enter into our pain, sometimes just to cry with us, and to give us promises that are not necessarily optimistic in their nature, but are true. And that is what God gives us in wisdom. He doesn't give us platitudes. He gives us a way of seeing the world and of himself interacting in that world and with us. So you could say it this way: wisdom lets us participate in God. It gives us a way to see God operating in our lives and how we are a part of that. And it allows us to grab hold of God's promises despite what we're feeling and despite what we are experiencing. Again, it all goes back to living by promise. The wise person is a person who lives by the promise. Not just knows promises, but lives as if they are true. And that's what separates them. So wisdom's gain is it gives you God and the peace that comes with God, the joy that comes beyond understanding. And that's why reading a book like Ecclesiastes and Proverbs is incredibly valuable to us, especially so because we're Christians and we have a fuller revelation than Koheleth did. Okay, well, next time we're going to be in chapter 11 and quickly closing the book. So I hope you've enjoyed Ecclesiastes so far. And I hope you enjoy the last 2 chapters. So I will see you next week, and I hope you have a wonderful and blessed day. Thanks for listening. Bye.